I want to read something from William Mounce. William Mounce is a Greek scholar. Well, he's a Greek expert, no doubt. Now, everybody has heard of Wallace, and Corey Minor, whom I've been talking to and about, certainly has heard of Wallace. He cites Wallace as proof of how he, Corey Minor, misuses the emphatic negation rule in the Greek in John chapter 10, verse 28. Well, William Mounce, now this is Wallace's beyond the basics of biblical grammar, which is an advanced grammar. Usually where you start here is second-year Greek. Well, first-year Greek in this series is William Mounce, and he's popular. Everybody knows him as, listen, his book, The Basics of Biblical Greek, which is where I learned Greek, and Wallace here. But that's where I started learning Greek. And when I started learning, I was looking to different resources and thinking, this is a little tough. And I got his book, and I thought, and it just exploded. When I got his book, I just took off like a rocket because he's got a great book. It's basically the standard of seminaries and Bible colleges when it comes to learning Greek, biblical Greek. Well, William Mounce. So let's talk about him. Now, I did read from him already in one of these shorter videos that I've put out. But the truth of the matter is, we've had this discussion. Corey Minor says, no, you're wrong. You haven't proven me wrong. The scholars that you provided, well, I need something better than them. Of course, he says that. But the fact is, I want to focus on this article that William Mounce has put out, or did put out at some point. I did read from it, but I want to focus on it because he says in it the same idea that I'm communicating or getting across. At least he doesn't focus on necessarily once saved, always saved. But what he says about how it works and the implications is exactly what I have been saying in reference to John chapter 10, verse 28. Now, I want to remind everybody that Corey Minor does rest his case on the Greek. That is not to say that his only argument is the emphatic negation of clause B as it is found in that clause. He's got other arguments and even goes to other passages. But the one he hammers the most is emphatic negation. The rule. Show me a scholar. Show me the scholar. The Greek rule says, he says. I've listened to him talk to people, and he says the Greek rule. I just read to you the Greek rule. So the rule isn't what it says, he tells people. And then when I'm talking to him, he says, he makes no big deal out of it. But I want to look at some things. Okay. Well, actually, I did want to remind everybody of his quotes. Let me pull it up here. He has said the emphatic negation in the Greek negates anything that you can come up with. That's the be-all, end-all. So yes, he makes the emphatic negation of Greek, which we've talked about, the be-all, end-all. It's like there's nothing you could do. He says, show me one scholar. Well, what good would it do if the emphatic negation is the be-all, end-all of the arguments and the discussion? But that's what he believes. That's how strongly he believes the emphatic negation. He's got other arguments. He'll appeal to context as well. But the emphatic negation, that's what he says. It's the be-all, end-all. It negates anything that you can come up with. Now, this isn't a discussion with JP. I forget the guy's full name. I talked to him a couple times. Nice guy. I think it's Joel. I don't want to get his last name wrong, though. In fact, I just know it's JP. But he's talking to him, and they're debating this issue, once saved, always saved. So all these statements that I've got here come from that context. And in 58 minutes and 48 seconds into the video, he says, the rule states you cannot later on walk away. So that's it. The Greek rule itself would have us believe that it's found in this statement. That's it. The sheep won't stop being sheep and all that. You cannot later on leave his hand according to this grammatical rule of emphatic negation, which is a basic Greek rule. Now, you see, he's gone outside of clause B into the somewhere else in that same context, in a way, in the immediate context, where Jesus says, no man will snatch them out of my hand and my Father's hand. And he's still applying the Greek to that. So that's how strongly the Greek is for Corey. And since he's got such a relatively large audience, I'm really going to make sure that there's people on the internet and YouTube that see, no, he's misusing this. It doesn't prove what he thinks it does. He's overconfident, and he doesn't want to back down. And he doesn't want to give up his channel, which he's challenged. That's his challenge. And I'm going to say this real quickly. Talking about these Greek scholars, this is his language. What I mean by that is he's the one who's always wanting you to show him scholars. So that's what I've been doing. It's not that I'm relying fully on them to come up with these points that I've talked about. I'm merely going to them because he keeps saying, you can't find one. I want he and his audience to know, no, they're out there, and you are misusing the Greek. He's not the first to do it. He's not the only person to do it. But as much as he's hammered it, he really thinks he's got something, but he simply doesn't. It's just not the case. So, now, one of the bad things about constantly getting scholars and their responses is they could always change. I mean, one of the Greek scholars I got a hold of definitely had the credentials. And his first email to me agreed with me. Yes, I agree with you, the emphatic negation in that statement. It doesn't mean this, that, and the other. They can't stop being sheep. You have to go from other contexts. Greek alone and all that is, you're overdoing it if you're doing that. That's true. And so I sent him another email, and I said, okay, well, that's fine. Good, thank you. And could you give me something a little bit more concise that I could use? And then he said, well, I agree with you, AK. I think you're onto something here, and then that and the other. But then he started I was like, well, I mean, he started the waffle a little bit, as they say. And what I said was, okay, so are we sure that we agree in here? And then he changed his mind. So, I couldn't do anything with him. So scholars could always come back and change their mind and say something different, or they could be inconsistent and say different things at different times. But this is what Corey wants, and it's what his audience. Oh yeah, you can't find a scholar. I remember one time I was in the side chat about this discussion on his channel, and the audience, hey, he's had an open challenge on this channel that he'll shut it down he'll never do it. But all right, let's go into this. The first thing I want to do is read from Bill Mounce's book of chapter 31. Now, he has these little devotions in the beginning of each chapter written by somebody else than him, but a Greek scholar nonetheless. This one is called Exegetical Insight, and it's about the emphatic negation. Now, I want to read this first in Mounce's grammar, even though it's not by Mounce, and then I got an article by Mounce. Now, Buist Fanning is most certainly a scholar. Anybody that will deny that. This guy is a scholar of scholars. Now, but I want to read what he says about the Greek here and show you that he doesn't say anything that is at odds with what I say. Now, what inferences he will make from it, he has to be asked. But nothing here in the Mounce's grammar about it I would disagree with. Okay, real quickly. It says, when we listen to someone who we care about and respect deeply, we listen for more than the surface meaning. The content is important, but we are keen to catch also the attitude of the speaker. What his words imply about a relationship with him, what is most significant to him, what he emphasizes as he speaks, and so forth. When we study the New Testament, we can look for such elements of meaning as well. This chapter describes a fascinating combination used by the Greek language to show emphasis. It is the use of the two negatives, ume, with a subjunctive verb to indicate a strong negation about the future. We're on the same page. I agree. The speaker uses the subjunctive verb to suggest a future possibility. But in the same phrase, he emphatically denies, by means of a double negative, that such could ever happen. This linguistic combination occurs about 85 times in the New Testament, often in significant promises or reassurance about the future. In Jesus' description of himself as the Good Shepherd in John 10, he gives one of the most treasured of these promises. My sheep listen to my voice. I know them. They follow me. I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish. Ume apollontai. Chapter 10, verse 27. It would have been enough to have with a future indicative verb here, but Jesus is more emphatic. Now, number one, the only difference between the emphatic negation and just normal speaking and denying something is just of emphasis. So as much as Corey hangs his hat on the emphatic negation, it doesn't make it more valid or true, whatever is being said, than just a normal negation. It's not the be-all, end-all any more than a normal negation. It's just more emphasis. That's fine. It does what it does, but it doesn't make it more valid. So it's not really that big of a deal. It's much ado about very little. Nevertheless, the subjunctive combination strongly denies even the possibility that any of Jesus' sheep would ever perish. They will certainly not perish. I agree. It is not my position that the sheep will ever perish, right? Now, keep in mind, all we're talking about is believers. That's what a sheep is. He's a believer, someone who's a disciple, who follows. That's what a true believer is in the Bible. So let's just speak as it is. A believer will never perish. Well, that's my belief. No, but if you stop believing, well, AK doesn't say in John 10 that they could stop believing. That's right. It's a different discussion. But the emphatic negation doesn't prove one way or the other whether sheep will always be sheep, whether believers will always be sheep. I've given you the example. If Hobby Lobby says our employees will never work Sundays, it doesn't imply their employees cannot quit in the future and work somewhere else and work Sundays. It's just saying as long as they are employees, they will not work Sundays. For Hobby Lobby, that is. They will by no means perish, is the sense of Jesus' assertion, which I completely agree. This is reinforced by the addition of the phrase, eiston aionion, forever. Jesus' emphatic promise is the bedrock of assurance and a godly motivation for every one of his sheep. So reinforces by the phrase, into the ages, eternal. That's what it means. It means eternally, which I agree. But it's for the sheep. Okay? It's just no different than saying believers, those who believe in me will never die. They will have eternal life. Yes, those who believe in me. But if they stop believing, they are not any longer those who believe in them. Now, whether believers can stop believing, I'm not trying to prove. What I'm trying to say is the emphatic negation and these things that are stated do not disallow that the believers could stop believing. It doesn't speak of that. It doesn't speak to it one way or the other to affirm or deny. Okay, so there's nothing there that I disagree with. I don't disagree with anything that is there. Now, what have I said? Now, I want you to notice something that I've said here, and let me pull up something. I've said this. I forget which person I said it to. Let's see. Let's look at this. No, let me go here. Yes, right here. Okay. Now, this is my email to Professor David Watson, and I'll make it where you can see it here. I'll enlarge it. Now, one thing, this is before I was even looking at Mounce. I, of course, read through Mounce, but that was years ago. It wasn't even on my mind. This is what I have said about this emphatic negation in these texts. And I have used I've used the Hobby Lobby example, and I want you to notice what I stated here. This is what I said to Professor Watson. In John chapter 10, verse 28, Jesus says his sheep, will never perish, ever perish. It is true that his sheep will not perish in the future, for this is explicitly stated. Everybody noticed that I said that? Because a lot of people who believe in once saved, always saved, on Corey's side, seem to have a hard time understanding that I have agreed with that. However, the emphatic negation does not imply that Jesus' sheep will necessarily always be his sheep. If Hobby Lobby were to say, our employees will never work Sundays, one cannot infer from this that their employees will never quit in the future, work somewhere else, and work Sundays. The statement only speaks of the named category, Hobby Lobby employees. In other words, the policy is stating, now listen to my words, and I even made it bold. The policy is stating that while one is an employee of Hobby Lobby, he will never work Sunday, but doesn't speak to whether he will ever stop being an employee or not. But you notice I used that word while. And then I came across an article by Mounce, who sees the idea the same way. Let's look. On Thursday, October 13, 2011, on his blog from BillMounce.com, the title is there a difference between certainly and never? Now, I know I've read this, but just think about this in comparison to the fact that this was already what I was trying to communicate in my emails to these professors. And then I come along and I see Mounce again, and I'm thinking, yeah, that's it. That's what I'm saying. Now, of course, we know that Corey cannot dismiss him. He will, of course, say, well, he's not really saying what you say, of course. Oh, but isn't he? Okay, let's read this once again. Mounce says, one of the beauties of knowing Greek is that you get to see nuances of meaning that are often lost in translation. It's not the translators, it's not that they don't see the meaning, it is that they simply cannot bring it over smoothly into English. A prime example is the many ways Greek can state a prohibition, each with its own nuance in terms of aspect, and sometimes a nuance of strength. There is quite a bit of difference between saying no and saying absolutely not. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus starts with laying out his basic understanding of what it means to be one of his followers. This is the role of the Beatitudes. And the Salt and the Light teaching stresses that a Beatitude-type person will be different from and in conflict with the world. Will be different from and in conflict with the world. Jesus then turns to the relationship between a Beatitude person and the Jewish leaders. The key verse is chapter 5, verse 20. The English Standard Version translates, "For I tell you that unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never, ume eiselthete, the kingdom of heaven." Now that Greek right there just simply means will never enter. That you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. But of significance is the terms ume right here. That's this emphatic negation, not enter, not enter. That's what we're talking about. That's the same construction found in John chapter 10, verse 28. My sheep will never ume perish. But here it's never enter the kingdom of heaven. Ume and the aorist subjunctive, just like John chapter 10, verse 28, form an emphatic negation. In John chapter 10, verse 28, the emphatic negation is perish. I'm sorry, the aorist subjunctive is perish. It is aorist subjunctive and means, on its own, may perish. And then you put the not in front of it, it is absolutely will not perish. Pretty strong words. But it is the never that causes the problem. Never. Is it true that if a person's righteousness never surpasses that of the Pharisees and scribes, they will never enter the kingdom? But that is not actually the thrust of the construction. Ume and the aorist subjunctive places its emphasis not on the issue of time, but rather on the certainty of the truth. This is why the NIV's "you will certainly not enter" is superior. Now notice, as long as a person's righteousness is no deeper than that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, it is absolutely impossible that they will that they will even enter God's kingdom. Yes, it is an issue of nuance, but it is an issue meaning. You notice what he says. He says, here's the real meaning. As long as, just like in my email exchange with the Hobby Lobby example, I try to communicate the same idea. When Hobby Lobby says, now I came up with this policy phrase, by the way. Now, I came up with it because I know they don't work on Sundays. It's not like they've ever stated this, as far as I know. I don't know. But if Hobby Lobby says, our employees will never work Sundays, that doesn't imply once an employee, always an employee. It just means while being employee, and I put that word in emphasis. And then that's the same principle that he's talking about here. that the emphatic negation used along with this aorist subjunctive of enter the kingdom, it just simply means as long as a person's righteousness does not surpass the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees. Or you could use my word, while a person's righteousness does not surpass theirs, they will never enter. They will absolutely not enter. But what he's saying is, it doesn't mean, or the implication of this is, well, if you stop in the future, if in the future you do, then it no longer applies to you, because it only means as long as, meaning if you change, if at some point that person's righteousness does surpass. You see, in other words, when Jesus says, if your righteousness does not surpass the righteousness of the Jewish leaders, you will never enter the kingdom. But that just means so long as you are this type of person. But if you change, well, that's different. That's exactly what I'm saying about John chapter 10, verse 28. I know what I'm saying, and I know what he's saying. I don't know if Mounce believes in once saved, always saved. I probably read something he said once that would probably tell me, but I just don't remember. I know what he says. I read another article, where he kind of talks about once saved, always saved, seemingly affirms it, but also says, you have to continue in obedience, that kind of thing. But it doesn't matter, because the principle is the same with the emphatic negation used along with the aorist subjunctive in John chapter 10, verse 28. What I have been saying is that it means so long as you are a sheep, you will never perish. So long as you are a sheep. Without implying that once a sheep, always sheep. Just like here, it doesn't imply once your righteousness doesn't surpass theirs, always your righteousness will not surpass theirs. That's just simply not what it means. It doesn't mean once you're this kind of person, you're always this kind of person. Because a sheep in John chapter 28 is a believer. It's someone who's following him. But whether or not a person could or will or may stop following cannot be ruled out by the emphatic negation, because that's not what Jesus is speaking on. That's not what the emphatic negation with the perish does. That's exactly what he's saying. Now, what I have said is no different than what he's saying here about the emphatic negation in that statement. That's the very thing. I want everybody to listen. It has been the very point that I'm making, and he's making the same point. He's just not making it about the same text. And everybody's telling me that I don't know what I'm talking about, at least from his side. They're saying, yeah, give me a real Greek scholar. But everybody admits is a Greek scholar, one of the top, is saying nothing different. I want everybody to notice this. These people that I've been talking to and commenting, Cody Garner, and that's fine. I don't mind talking. I mean, that's fine. But all of you guys have been talking to me like I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm saying nothing different than what he's saying. And Hindsight's 2020, when I got ready for the discussion, is when just a little bit before my discussion with Corey Minor, I went to look and see what Mounce said, and I came across this, and I had this. This was the fourth of four people that I was going to offer. I had, what was his name, Birding. I had Watson. I had someone named McKnight, and then I had Mounce. And if I would have just saw this days before, or sometime before the discussion, earlier than I did, it probably would have stuck out to me more, and I would have said, no, hammer this. Go to this. Because, of course, anybody else can say, oh, that's not a scholar. Nope, he doesn't count. Nope, this one doesn't count. Of course. You can't discount him as a scholar. Of course, he will dismiss him in some other way. Hey, no, AK, well, listen, he's not really saying. Now, I know what the first thing people are going to do. They're going to say, oh, but the context is different because Jesus says, I give them eternal life. But yes, see, if you say that, you have failed to miss the very thing I've been telling you over and over. You are now appealing to something else. What I'm trying to show is that when Corey appeals to the Greek and says these statements, he says the rule. He doesn't say the rule along with everything else. He says the rule says you cannot later walk away. He says clause B, would be wrong. He's hanging his hat on the emphatic negation. Now, the moment you start appealing to other things in the context, you've left using this as an argument. And what I'm saying is, for Jesus to say, my sheep will not perish, does not imply they will always be sheep. Does not imply that they will always be sheep. And if you think, well, okay, but he says he gives them eternal life, that means they will always be sheep. Suppose I grant to you for the sake of argument that it does. Then you don't need the Greek, because the Greek isn't going to help anymore. If saying I give them eternal life makes the case, you're still left with the emphatic negation not really doing much of anything. It might emphasize. So let me say it like this. I've already told you guys in different videos many times why saying I give them eternal life doesn't prove once saved, always saved. Because it's only I give them, believers, eternal life. So if you stop believing, of course, well, that can't be decided from that passage. But let me grant to you guys, for the sake of discussion, that yes, when he says nobody will snatch them out of my hand, and when he says I give them eternal life, that means once saved, always saved. I don't believe it, but let me grant to you that, yes, that's the case. There's nothing more that the emphatic negation does. It doesn't help. It only emphasizes what's already there. If those terms establish once saved, always saved, number one, then that's it. Emphatic negation is not needed. And number two, it only emphasizes that because it's already established. The emphatic negation in the clause can only emphasize what is already established or stated. So if those terms don't establish once saved, always saved, then it doesn't emphasize once saved, always saved. So the discussion cannot hang, like Corey thinks it does, on the emphatic negation. It has to hang on what do these other things mean. We didn't spend much time talking about those because we were arguing about the emphatic negation. So let me say it once again. In order for the emphatic negation to establish or to have any favor of once saved, always saved, you simply have to find it somewhere else in the context. And if you do, it only emphasizes that. But it's not like the emphatic negation is doing anything. It's not proving anything. It's not establishing anything. It's only establishing something else that's already stated. That's it. In which case, you don't even need it. It's just a matter of emphasis. That's why the discussion is not on the emphatic negation, Corey Minor. It's on the other things stated in context. So when Corey Minor says the rule, don't you know, let me read to you the rule. The rule states this, the rule states that. The rule can do nothing if you don't already have once saved, always saved from some other thing stated. And if you do, then your rule didn't establish it like Corey Minor argues that it does. I want everybody to understand that. Corey Minor is misusing it. He's making much more about the emphatic negation than it is allowed. He's not the first, won't be the last, but he does nonetheless. Oh, and that thing I was saying that Mounce was saying about obedience, he's going to say it here in a little bit. And I'm not saying that, I'm not representing Mounce as not believing once saved, always saved. You'd have to ask him. But what he said about Ume here is the same thing I've been saying. I want everybody to remember that. So everybody from Corey's side saying, I don't know what I'm talking about, I don't know Greek, and Corey challenges me once again, make a case, AK. But Mounce is saying what I'm saying. And if you don't think that Mounce is saying the same thing I've been saying, then it only proves you haven't understood what I've said. Because I know what I'm saying, and it's this. When he says, as long as the person's righteousness, that's what I'm saying about the sheep. As long as you are a sheep, you will never perish. So Mounce isn't saying anything different than me. Here, in this passage, it's the same principle I've been saying about John chapter 10, verse 28. There it is, everybody. So I have now, once again, successfully refuted. And actually, I'm demonstrating now that what I have already said successfully refutes Corey Minor's Greek exegesis. I've established that it is valid because here's a Greek scholar that everybody recognizes saying the same principle about the same construction, about another aorist subjunctive verb somewhere else. It's the same principle that I've been talking about. So that's it. Corey Minor now obligated once again to shut down his channel or hand it over to me. But if he'll just stop saying what he says and concede and start preaching the right thing, I'll let it slide. He says, I forget where I read this, and this is the statement where he kind of talks about once saved, always saved, seemingly backs off from the quote that he makes and affirms once saved, always saved. But you could tell Mounce here, at least, is thinking, we don't need to be too careful to affirm once saved, always saved. We got to make sure we recognize that you need to be continuing. And this is, and as he moves on, it's a little bit irrelevant than what I'm emphasizing about the emphatic negation, but I just thought it was interesting. He said, I forgot where I read this, probably stopped, but Jesus is calling for a deep obedience. He does not want more religious activity. This is the answer of the Pharisees and many religious people who go to church buildings today. What Jesus requires is a deep obedience that originates deep inside a person's being, in their new heart of flesh given by the Spirit, and out of the heart springs forth into action. Without that, a person should be absolutely convinced that no amount of religious activity will amount to a hill of beans in Jesus' eyes. I wonder how many people attend church buildings today have fallen into the same trap as first century Judaism of thinking that all God requires are certain spiritual markers and have made issues of the heart secondary or non-essential. I wonder how verse 20 squares with the idea that if you have raised the hand and said the magical sinner's prayer, that nothing else must happen. Actually, I don't wonder. I agree, by the way. I don't believe in a sinner's prayer as it is defined. Okay, so this is the shorter version. He actually used this same phrase. This part right here, he actually talks about in another article, and he actually says more than he does here. But that's okay. So there it is. I want everybody to communicate. Never mind, scratch that. I just want to communicate to you instead of sending other people to do it. The very thing that I was trying to communicate about John chapter 10, verse 28 is that. That's it, right there. What you just read in Mounce's article is exactly what I was trying to communicate. You saw my email to the scholar that I said it means, in the Hobby Lobby example, while you are a Hobby Lobby. It doesn't mean while you are a Hobby Lobby employee. It doesn't mean once a Hobby Lobby employee, always a Hobby Lobby employee. And that's what I was trying to communicate about John chapter 10, verse 28. And you just read Mounce saying the same thing about that verse. Now, of course, Corey's going to say why it's different. That's different, of course. But no, what it shows is that my exegesis was valid, that what I said was correct. Corey is once again shown to be refuted. His challenge is once again shown to be accepted, successfully answered. He should concede. He should concede. But that's for your food. That's food for thought, for your consideration.